in 8 of the 10 most climate vulnerable countries in Africa, at least 60% of the working population are employed in highly climate sensitive agricultural sector. That's Namibia's reality as well. On average, more than 2/3 of the population in Africa's most climate vulnerable countries are living in poverty today. About 70% of African cities are highly vulnerable to climate shocks, and small and medium-sized towns and cities are most at risk. Since 2010, the number of protests and riots in Africa over water resources have multiplied by 40. That was a bit staggering for me. And the last one I'll share with you today is, while almost 3/4 of African countries have achieved SDG 13 on climate action, no EU or North American countries is on track for achieving the same. So faced with these realities and Namibia's fairly unique circumstances, but not as unique as one might have thought, we tried to take as practical an approach as possible to try to contribute to decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, but of course at the same time trying to contribute to our own country's industrialization agenda and objectives. To give you some context for some of you who may not be familiar with Namibia, almost half of our employed population is actually working in agriculture, and our largest generation asset in Namibia, and Detlef will tell you, is Ruacana, which is a hydroelectric power station. And of course, when there's a drought, the agricultural sector will get hit pretty bad, and of course the amount of electricity that we can generate for ourselves would also be very adversely impacted. Therefore, we have to import even more electricity from the SAPP, sometimes from South Africa, which in itself is energy distress, but of course a lot of the power that we'd be getting from them is generated by coal-fired power stations, as Kuda mentioned. So you can see the cacophony of dilemmas that are contributing to the energy insecurity, poverty, and at the same time climate vulnerability of Namibia, but actually Southern Africa as a region. So we decided to try and open up our country to try and contribute meaningfully to decarbonizing these hard-to-abate sectors, but we also knew the task at hand was too big for Namibia to do alone, and so we did go out and look for friends, partners such as Germany, even the KONRAD ADENAUER STIFTUG Foundation contributed to a hydrogen market study essentially that we undertook across Europe, where we ended up meeting potential customers. Because at the end of the day, climate change, and this is one of the small things that we do want to encourage small nations to consider, combating climate change can actually be a practical and profitable endeavor. It can be a business. So for example, when we went to Duisburg, we met various people who worked at ThyssenKrupp at a steel mill there. And steel is one of those hard-to-abate sectors, and they were looking to use hydrogen to decarbonize their operations, and using that to reduce the iron ore, and then using electric arc furnaces to produce steel from that DRI. It was a really, really interesting experience because it went very quickly from academic to practical, commercial, and actually without that solution, that steel mill wouldn't exist anymore, because the legislation in Europe would essentially mean the amount of carbon emissions that they were producing would make them unprofitable, and therefore probably have to shut down. So I do value the partnership, and that's why I wanted to mention it specifically, that CAS and the German government, which has been articulated by the ambassador, have essentially shared with Namibia. We've learned a lot, but also very practically, as Marco from Hyphen has walked in, we are trying to engage with the German government to try and make sure that the product that might be produced in Namibia is not just sustainable from an environmental perspective, and of course Mr. Brown will be doing a very good job of making sure that we do that, but at the same time commercially viable and commercially acceptable, and there we'd be working very closely with BMWK and their facility, whether it's H2 Global or others. The bottom line is Namibia cannot do this on its own, and it would need bilateral and multilateral partners, and at COP27 we'll be announcing further partnerships that we are engendering with the European Union. And I would encourage all other African states and all of you who have traveled to try and do a similar thing, because it does make the impossible seem just that little bit more possible. I would like to finish off with this other few stats. When people think about hydrogen, of course we think about electrons and molecules, and we think about electrolyzers, and we think about it from a very chemistry orientated perspective sometimes. But let me give you some statistics just from a logistics perspective that might become a reality here in Namibia. So during the construction phase of this project, we were trying to understand what logistics would need to be undertaken in order to deliver, wind blades for 800 turbines, etc. And these are some statistics we got from the project developers, which of course are preliminary and they will change. But we were looking at normal loads, so 34-ton payloads, containers or similar, over the 4 years of construction, could be anywhere north of 36,800 loads. So you can think what that activity would look like at the ports. Abnormal loads, turbine blades, etc., 7,800 over the 4 years. Water, we would need 220 trucks per day, possibly 120,300 liters over 1.5 years. Number of people, 292,000, with various return trips requiring 200 buses daily. And aggregate for the turbine foundations, I think this is 55,000 tons over 4 years. So I guess my point is the following. When we're looking at hydrogen, we can't focus on electricity, which by the way, we are doing that as well. NamPower, the government of Namibia, and Hyphen are looking at actually off-taking some of the excess power that will be produced by the project, looking to reduce our reliance on imports. We'll be doing the same thing from a water perspective. We're expanding the Luderitz town to accommodate an influx of people. But if you just consider those statistics from a logistics perspective, think what that means for the transportation sector, for the construction sector, for even the hospitality sector. Where will all these people sleep? And again, I will stress, it is an undertaking that would require partnership. Partnership with our neighbors in Southern Africa, partnership with our customers across the oceans, and importantly, partnerships amongst our communities, civil society, government, private sector, financiers, etc., etc. So I guess what I am trying to say as a member of the presidency and the Namibian government is, we speak about these opportunities with a lot of humility, with a lot of trepidation, and certainly with a lot of care. Because again, a lot of that activity will be taking place in a fairly sensitive environment, and we would need to respect the flora and the fauna that exist in that area as well. So I wish you a very, very fruitful engagement over the next 2 years, where I am allowed and where I can. I'd love to sit in and listen and learn from the discussions, and sometimes it's not always Anya who has to allow me, but Marco, I was actually supposed to be sitting with him right now finishing up some of the negotiations, and he's in his t-shirt because he's running off to the airport, and next week I have to fly to Frankfurt. So it's a really busy time for the Namibian government, but we are really, really honored to be able to host what I'm sure will be a very productive engagement over the next 2 days. Thank you very much for having me. Cheers.